Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. Iki atu ki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora.
Right. Sorry, I'm just getting my... So we have our declarations of interest. Are there any changes to those? Okay, let's now move on to the paper, which is the funding review and cost pressures.
So I thought Mark and Tim might lead out on this one. I'll do the next one, which is the workshop. So Mark and Tim, you there?
Absolutely. And just by way of context, what we thought we'd do to support the paper is get Tim to run through a presentation that Adrian, myself, and Mark Lambert did to councillors last week at the CC Oversight governance session. The presentation that Tim will put up is essentially, it's a public document now. So we have removed some numbers from it because it went into the public domain, and it's interfacing into the council budget process. In parallel, we are also having conversations with Waka Kotahi about what might be required if a shift is required around moving some funding within the NLTP. But without further ado, I suggest to hand over to Tim and get him to basically run you through these slides because they really paint the picture of the issues that are described in the paper.
Kia ora koutou. Just by way of context, this presentation is largely representing what our current state is. In the bigger context, there's what I'd call the immediate pressures, particularly around public transport, patronage and revenue. And then what I'd classify as emerging pressures, but they are current. So for example, a greater focus or a greater emphasis to invest in climate change activities, and to also work to align investment in growth activities with our partners such as Kāinga Ora. And when we put this all together and combine it with some of the delivery pressures that we're seeing, it's triggered us to consider whether we need to make a variation to the RLTP as it currently stands. One of the triggers that we are considering at the moment is the adoption of the climate action targeted rate and whether that is passed, and that would likely trigger a need to vary the RLTP in the first place. But I'll run you through this presentation, hopefully reasonably quickly. Just please bear in mind that I can't see whether people have got their hands up, so if there are questions, then please feel free to interject.
Okay, Tim, what we will do is we'll wait to the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank
you.
And then
I can with the questions.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of, I guess, the three parties at the moment, KiwiRail, Waka Kotahi and Auckland Transport, we're all experiencing financial pressures at the moment and cost escalations. With Waka Kotahi and KiwiRail, a lot of the programs are already in flight and are looking to manage those budgets. So there's in terms of the RLTP, the focus is largely on the impact to Auckland Transport's program, and partly because we deal with both capital investments, so improvements, but we also deal in operational stuff, operational activities such as public transport services. So I appreciate that whilst the RLTP covers all parties, the focus of what we're discussing today is largely around Auckland Transport's program. In simple speak, we're in a perfect storm. Auckland Transport is due to COVID and now changes in behaviour, particularly around working from home and some of the restrictions. Our public transport patronage is well below our targets, and it's expected to stay below for quite some time. There's policy measures coming in play around the discounted public transport, and while we haven't fully formed what that would mean for actual patronage, there is a potential risk around revenue. Our focus area on public transport services is really optimising what we have at the moment. So keep the buses on the road for as long as possible and look to balance what I'd call excess peak time capacity and try and improve the off-peak capacity. But even with all of that, we're still in a situation where Auckland Transport needs additional funding to be able to continue a decent level of service for public transport. In terms of capital delivery, we're seeing a bit of a hangover from previous emergency budgets, and that's sliding our program out in terms of delays. And then on top of that, we're seeing cost increases or escalation well beyond what was budgeted, and that's having an impact on what we can do as well. Lastly, in this slide is around the regional fuel tax, and I understand there have been some questions raised about whether that will continue. We've done some preliminary analysis of what that would mean if it was to be discontinued, and in simple terms, it means that we would have to find another $1 billion or source an additional $1 billion to be able to continue with our capital program. So piecing that all together as well, and it places us in quite a difficult situation at this point. And to be honest, this slide deck probably goes into a little bit more detail now. The revenue pressures I've just explained, we're well behind, and in the context of developing the initial budgets and the initial service patterns and so forth, it was assumed that we wouldn't have any further COVID restrictions in the 21-22 financial year, and didn't take into account any potential further strains or additional strains that may come. Probably the most important part at the moment is that whilst this financial year we have received top-up funding for public transport services, we have no certainty beyond this financial year. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we are talking to Waka Kotahi already about I guess reallocating some of the National Land Transport Fund towards public transport services. The cost and delivery pressures I've explained, and one of the things we are seeing internally within Auckland Transport at the moment is our voluntary turnover is increasing. So people are leaving, and in some quite critical roles to be able to deliver our programs, such as project management and technology. This slide here, I think, sums up where we're seeing public transport, and I do want to stress that this does not include the Climate Action Targeted Rate Initiative, which adds another approximately 15 million passengers by 2032. But you can see here, compared to what our pre-COVID predictions were in terms of public transport patronage, the first set of lockdowns had a big hit, or resulted in quite a significant reduction in public transport patronage, and we're seeing a much slower recovery than what we anticipated. A key thing for Auckland Transport now is to try and attract customers back to PT. How the discounted fares fit into the mix. Put simply, yes, it's a short-term incentive at the moment. There may be some challenges if there's a decision to unwind that after 3 months. So being able to attract people to PT, having cheaper fares is one mechanism to use, but then reinstating fares to normal levels, whilst from a financial perspective is probably a logical step in terms of how customers react to that. We're not quite sure yet. So the other thing in this is the longer term benefits, and even the short term benefits in terms of how effective it is. We still need to work through that because we're still in a COVID restricted environment. There's also some discussion about free fares. Again, linking that to the climate change imperative the climate change emergency that's been declared by council. That's one of the levers that we could potentially use. However, working through that, it could and should see increase in public transport patronage, but looking from another lens, it could cost Auckland Transport up to $500 million per annum to operate the PT system in the longer term. But the discussion here isn't so much to steer the committee or steer Auckland Transport in any particular direction. It's just to put everything on the table to clearly articulate our current and future pressures. Again, our focus is on optimising the public transport system at the moment. So removing what I call reallocating excess capacity. When I say that, it means We've got more buses running in the peak than we need. And again, linking back to how do we get more people on PT is really trying to improve that that off-peak public transport service so that it becomes a little bit more viable and a bit more of an attractive option. We are looking to delay the implementation of some new services and same for some timetable improvements. Just to put this into context, a large component of the public transport operating costs are what we'd call fixed, insofar as we are keeping our drivers and we are keeping the system operating, even though that we're having to manage some of the services that are implemented. And on the revenue side, prior to COVID, we were around the 40% in terms of fare box recovery, which means we're recovering 40% of the cost of running the services through fares. During COVID and now we're sitting at around 20%, which articulates the scale of gap that we really have between operating the services and what we're receiving. And further fare reductions will further impact the bottom line. And in the context of where we sit and our dilemma at the moment, public transport is going to be and is a key part of delivering on Te Taro Kia Tawhiri. And we see that there's both a big opportunity and a big risk in some respects. So from a purely financial perspective, if we were to take our current financial position and operate in that manner, then from a commercial perspective, you would cut services. But once we do that, we lose people from PT for a long time, and it's very difficult to get them back. But putting on the outcome side of the equation and wanting to attract more PT, we've been trying to find the right balance between keeping what's a reasonable level of service for public transport to start hitting those objectives and get people back onto PT. But we see this public transport as actually critical to being able to deliver on climate change objectives. For the capital program, again, I articulated this or summarised it a little bit earlier. The slide here, it really presents the impact of the first round of COVID and to see that we're still affected by it. So when the first lot of restrictions were imposed, we obviously had to make changes to our program, and we're really only starting to recover from that. And we're expecting that we'd be in the recovery phase for the next couple of years. In simple terms, our improvements program is effectively being pushed out by a year. There are some details in here about how we're going in terms of our current year performance. It's probably fair to say that we're behind where we anticipated being. Again, we didn't anticipate being in lockdowns again or having COVID restrictions in place. And the last bit of commentary is around the RFT. Again, it's still in place, but this is just intended to signal to the RTC that if it were removed, then we'd have to find an alternative funding source worth $1 billion. And that's to continue with the current program. Concluding, okay, we're in a very difficult situation. We expect that public transport patronage will be lower for longer, and again, that's not taking into account the discounted fares and so forth. If discounted fares have an impact, then there's still probably an impact on our revenue stream. Put it in simple terms, we as Auckland Transport don't have sufficient funds at the moment to keep the public transport service operating as it is at the moment beyond 2022. Our focus has really been to protect our core service and making sure that we set ourselves up for success in delivering to climate change objectives. On the capital side, we're seeing quite a bit of escalation at the moment that wasn't budgeted. Obviously, COVID's impacted everything, and we're seeing that through seeing that through prices and delays at the moment. So that's basically a summary of our current position. I would just add that in terms of our future position, or some of the emerging pressures, obviously additional investment in climate change activities, which we're seeing some through the climate action targeted rate, but we expect that there'll be a heavy focus on investing further in climate change activities, especially after the transport emissions reduction plan is complete, and also the release of the emissions reduction plan from central government. We're not sure at the moment what funding allocations are being made or what budget allocations are being considered for that, and we still need to do a bit of work around that. And whilst this presentation presents what I'd call a snapshot of where we are, working through the details of what it means for our improvements program and where we should direct our money, we are still working through those details. And the last one was around the growth initiatives. So we are working with Kāinga Ora at the moment. In the RLTP, a lot of the investment in growth is signalled for the latter part of the decade. However, things are moving at pace, and there may be not so much some pressure, but there may be a desire and to achieve a better land use and transport integrated outcome to invest at the same time or similar times as Kāinga Ora, so that we can influence positive travel behaviours right at the outset, as opposed to, I guess, trying to retrofit at some other point in time. So that more or less concludes what I was planning on presenting at this point. In summary, again, we have short-term pressures, particularly around public transport. We are underfunded in renewals at the moment, with Waka Kotahi not fully funding our asset management plan. And then we have pressure on the improvements programs with delays and cost escalations. And when it's all put together, it puts us in a difficult position. And we wanted to signal to the RTC that we are working towards whether we look to vary the RLTP and rephase our improvements program to match. And any questions?
Thanks, Tim. That was a really good run through.
So where's the good news?
If people can use the hand up, that would be great. Okay, I think I was hearing Wayne starting.
I was just wondering where the good news was.
Oh, the good news, if I may answer that as best I can, whilst this is painted in quite a light of being negative, it also presents an opportunity as well. So part of this process was to signal to the RTC where we are at the moment and to seek feedback. If in moving through the next stages of this, it does present ourselves with an opportunity to look hard about where we should be investing to just meet our minimum level service, but setting ourselves up for success. So with that, part of the thinking has already been formed around, we absolutely need to keep public transport on the road. We absolutely need to invest in our renewals program. And then moving through that, what would that mean for our improvements program? The other part of this is with the transport emissions reduction plan and the emerging emissions reduction plan from the government, there is the potential for additional sources of funds to be able to help set ourselves up for success. And they're the things that we are looking to work through over the next couple of months.
Wayne, if I maybe just add to that, we've talked about in the past that the current PT funding model is not really sustainable in its current form. I think what's happening at the moment is it's highlighted those issues to the extent that it's actually forcing other conversations, particularly with central government. So if you said where's the good news, is we've been having lots of conversations, and I appreciate this is a public forum, but behind closed doors with council, Waka Kotahi via ATAP about exactly that funding dilemma slide. Is if we're serious about addressing some of those climate and emission type issues, what needs to be true? Now, whether those are all resolved by 30 June, unlikely, but it's the conversation is now occurring.
Okay, look, can I just get a contextual question clarified, and then I'll go to Darren, Abby, and Mark in that order. So the first thing is that if we had a variation to the Regional Land Transport Program, that would take some months, so it would not be in time for the commencement of the 23 financial year. Just that's correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thanks. Because of the scale, and obviously there's a draft, and then there's a consultation and a final process.
Sorry, Madam Chair, if there may not need to be the consultation process depending on the scale of the change, and that's something we haven't ascertained yet. It's actually a two-part process.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Right, so let's just when we come back to discuss this further, that will all be before us. The second thing is that we can safely assume that the perfect storm in some version is also impacting Waka Kotahi and Kiwi Rail, both of whom are actually have to be provided under the umbrella of the RLTP. That's also correct, I'm asking?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
It's definitely impacting RUC revenues with Waikato.
Okay, and we don't have today a report on the agenda about the scale of pressures that they are facing with respect to their programs.
No, that's correct.
Okay, fine.
Madam Chair, can I just add that some of their programs that are under pressure are through the umbrella of NZ Up.
Sure.
And so
but they do have programs in the RLTP.
Yes. Yes, but yeah, okay. Yes.
They do, because they need funding through the NLTP. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. All right. So it's just helpful to know that this is, the RLTP is an integrated fund investment program for the region. Now going to Abby.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was a really great paper, and I don't think any of the issues are new, but you've crystallised them in a really helpful way. Just a couple of questions from me. The first was, we're implementing, and well done, the 50% reduction on PT fares tomorrow. Have we got confidence about the source of funding for that? Because that seems...
Yes, we do.
Management. And then the other is, which of the trends that you've identified, Tim, do you think are enduring? Like, they're new trends. COVID's changed the world enough that we've actually got to assume that things are profoundly different, and which are the sort of shorter term ones. And we don't necessarily need to discuss that now, but it would be useful, I think, to have your perspective on which of these are, how much working from home are we genuinely expecting to endure? So those were the two from me.
My perspective at this point is that a component from working from home will endure, and particularly around office-based work. Beyond that, I'm not entirely. I wouldn't put a stake in the ground on that at the moment. I think there is, at the moment, my impression that is that PT will recover, but there'll still be a component of work from home. How people respond to things like discounted fares and whether they change people's attitudes towards public transport change, I think that's probably a work in progress, to be fair.
Well, we've got a pretty good 3-month pilot, but trying to pull apart all the influences on that is going to be not easy. Okay, Darren.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the presentation. Really sobering, but I thought also really useful context. And I was going to make the same comment. I feel like it also is an incredible catalyst for change and appetite to do things maybe very differently and look at things differently. And I just wondered on that PT, you made the point that there's a fixed cost to running a PT system, obviously, and whether that then affords us first we've got a 3-month experiment that's about to happen now, but how we might take that and model something quite different to how we've thought about PT costs and pricing at peak and off peak, and how we might think about, if we have the technical ability to do this, how we might price PT very differently to how we've done it in the past, and use this as an opportunity. I'm just using that as an example to do many things, to trial. As we know, we have to get PT back, patronage back, and it would be a good opportunity to trial a lot of things with limited, I guess, cost impact, because it's there now. It's already, so longer term, could we find a better solution? So that was my thoughts.
Very good, Darren. I think that certainly, I think, is going to be critical going forward. Mark.
Just a couple of reactions to the paper. I think we all recognise the perfect storm. We've felt that coming for quite a while. But also, to Adrian's point, I definitely think it's a full system pressure, not just with us. It's New Zealand wide. I think it's inevitable, given the extent and the fundamental change that's occurring, that we are going to have to redo the RLTP quite substantially, because the next 3, 4, 5 years that we can see are going to be quite different than what we thought. So I don't know when the optimum time to invest that time is, but it's coming pretty quick. You made a comment, Tim, about investing in renewals and maintenance, but I think Wayne made the point a couple of meetings ago that I think we need to keep it at a level where it's at least being maintained in its current state. And I don't want to be the custodian of a sort of a decaying asset, and I get the feeling that is occurring in some ways. And the final point, and I can't find the reference, but I remember reading somewhere in the 923 pages of reading that under the RLTP, we haven't prioritised our projects and what we're doing. And I just feel, given the risk and the volatility of the world and our funding mechanism, we might have to start prioritising those so that our stakeholders understand, if we don't get the funds, what actually misses out.
Go for it, Tim. I don't want to say.
Yeah. So just before I move on to Wayne, could I just have confirmation from the executive that once we have prioritised projects, programs, operational costs inside the RLTP, they don't have a priority within the RLTP? Could you just clarify that for us?
Tim, do you want to pick that up? We prioritise within the RLTP, absolutely. Tim, do you want to pick that up?
There's how do I describe this?
Yes.
So within the RLTP, there's category 1, 2, and 3. So essential, discretionary, and if funds are available. At the next level down, there is a prioritisation that sits underneath it, but it's probably not at this point well enough to develop to be able to say, look, we're going to start this, stop this, and so forth. And that's part of the work we're doing at the moment with the improvements program. In a broad context, for us at the moment, the PT operations sits first, the renewal sits second, and then the improvement program sits third. Within the improvement program, again, whether this is formally fleshed out or not, it's we continue the projects that we're contracted, and then we invest in the highest priority activities and develop the pipeline. So there is a prioritisation that sits underneath it. It's not just the outcome side of it. It also crosses over into delivery, and there's been a lot of work in the last month or so to really flesh that out, and that's still ongoing at this point in time.
Tim, could I just clarify? Could you remind us, is that transparent in the publicly available RLTP?
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add, sorry, there's one, but you must determine what, sure you didn't mean to, it's just the safety program within there is effectively ring-fenced amount of money. And, there's prioritisation within that, but, that money isn't up for grabs.
Sorry, there's one last one there, the regional fuel tax, that is ring-fenced as well.
As a funding source and the projects that
That's right.
are all
Correct.
tagged. Thank you.
And that part is
does
within
that,
the publicly available document.
Mark, does that start to answer the questions that you've raised?
It certainly helps. I'll have to find the reference, but I do remember reading that there were some priority questions around RLTP, but it does emphasise, given funding is a scarce resource and at risk, we are going to have to make some very delicate decisions around what we do and don't do going forward. And that's, I'm not worried about, I'm just sensitive that we're going to have to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Wayne. And
yes, I did neglect to say this was an excellent paper and very timely, so thanks very much, team. It does pull a lot of things together. Just reiterating what Darren and Mark have been talking about, I don't think this is going to be a minor review of the RLTP. You know, in May we've got the government coming out with a submission reduction plan. The Auckland Council reduction plan is not going to be far behind it, and there's going to be some really big issues to talk about and grapple with. I actually hadn't comprehended that there was actually a fundamental disagreement between Waka Kotahi and ourselves on funding our asset management plan, despite it being through ATAP. And so we've got two things going on. We've got a cap on renewals, and there's on maintenance as well. And then but yes, behind that there's a technical difference between what should be funded and what shouldn't be. Is that correct?
It's not quite that way. Just to clarify, Waka Kotahi has endorsed and approved Auckland Transport's asset management plan.
Yeah.
At a technical level. It's the funding question that, based on available funding, they then put a cap in place which had less money available than in the approved dam.
Okay. Because we've over the last year, I suppose we've just perhaps lost sight of the 50% formula that we were working to, and so continuing with renewals invites us to reduce the effective FAR rate for Auckland. So is that a consequence of where we're at this level?
Not yet. It actually hits us more in the third year of the RLTP when renewals are forecast to ramp up from about 250 million to 320 million a year. That's when the cap bites. It's not biting at the moment.
So we're going to go into the next financial year on a bit of a wobble, aren't we? We're not going to know for sure what's in front of us. We don't know. We're not going to know what's going to be funded.
Wade, I guess just if you think about it this way, and I've got to be careful to say in a public forum, but we're working through a budget process with council around the affordability.
Yeah.
We've separately been feeding a lot of information to central government so they're aware in their May budget around the pressures that are particularly being faced around PT. Now, there may or may not be more money made available as part of the ERP. If there's not, we're then engaging in a formal process with Waka Kotahi about how money can be rerouted within existing funding as part of the RLTP. So I guess what that looks like is, if I was sitting there as a director, we want something in writing from Waka Kotahi pre-30 June that confirms the level of funding available on 1 July.
Yeah. Okay, that answers my question. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Wayne, I'd probably go a step further in terms of your original question about moving parts, certainty, all those things around funding. If you think at the moment, some of the other big programs we've got that are due to make, the board is due to make decisions, or the AT board is due to make decisions on, including the Eastern Busway and things, then, commitment to really, really big projects can undermine smaller programs if we're not careful. And so if you think about, there's other ring fence programs like the local board capital fund, all those sorts of things, then there are some really really kind of difficult questions or complex questions that will need to be resolved in the coming months.
Yeah. I'd agree with that thinking as well.
Yeah. Okay, Izzy.
Wanted to go back to sort of Wayne's opening question, where's the good news? And I think the one piece that's come up so far as good news is the PT 3-month pilot in in Adrian's language, this is a really cool 3-month pilot. We've got an opportunity. My question is, do we have a really good sense of what data we're going to be able to collect so we know what we've learned in this 3 months? Because I think that will be a really useful piece of information as we go into needing to redo RLTP in terms of understanding customer response and price sensitivity. And in Darren's kind of worldview of like, what can we test in terms of putting forward new pricing mechanisms? I'm fascinated in, for example, gamification of public transport. There's really good evidence on behavioural nudges, but I think if we don't collect the right data in this period on changes in behaviour and changes in attitude to public transport, we're not well placed to then make sensible proposals going forward.
Maybe I'll take. Oh, way you go, Adrian.
I was going to say I'll take that mostly as a provocation between Izzy both and Darren. Izzy, in your role as intern, it would be really beneficial for you to go and learn about our passenger transport model, and particularly with your perspective and worldview to understand what it can and can't model. That would be really helpful, so that when we come to, as we will undoubtedly do, look at some new ways of thinking about passenger transport and how we increase our whole PT utilisation, you'll be able to make an even further contribution to that. Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Spot on, Madam Chair. I think that we will look to collect. We've got more and more sophisticated over time about how we collect information about through these trials. The one kind of caveat is the one thing that Adrian called out much earlier on, which is how do you distill what is the changes driven by the discount and what is driven by a number of other factors. But nevertheless, we will still be able to get insights and test what we kind of in some ways has been theoretical around elasticities and all those sorts of things. So opportunity, but caveats around it.
Look, this is a very important briefing. I think that basically concludes our update of the Regional Transport Committee. Clearly, as all of these very large shifting drivers of our investment program are occurring, the actual timing and scale of a review of the regional land transport plan, whether it's a variation or it's a more substantive review, will need significant consideration by all of the contributing partners and by the RTC as to how we manage that. One of the only sort of comment that I'd sort of make in conclusion is that because we are dealing with not only some really large shifts, but also they are complex in the way they can interact with what is an affordable and investable program. It is going to be important that, and just going to the comment really I made to Izzy, that we fully engage with Future Connect, and so we actually do understand how everything interrelates, the extent to which decisions have been made in the past about ring fencing, which of those are movable, which of them are only movable by changes in legislation. So there, we do need to understand that there may be some more significant shifts, and some of the assumptions that we've had to date will have to be tested in order for us to essentially have the whole affordability, because while there are potentially some additional revenue streams, some of them are very short term or one-off, and some of them may be slightly longer term. Nothing is actually promised or baked in at this stage. So we are dealing with some basically, in terms of, for many of us, in terms of our lifetimes, the impact of significantly increasing inflation has been something we have not had to deal with. And it has a very corrosive effect in terms of what we can deliver on a day-to-day and a capital program perspective. So things like this, we've just got to basically grapple with them. So this has been a great, I think we've got a number of burning platforms here. It's really good to have one, but I do think we've got more than one. And I think you've given us a great introduction to that